Hey, everybody. Welcome in on a Tuesday, the Utopia Football Podcast. I am Sean Pendergast, host of this here podcast, co-host of Payne and Pendergast on Sports Radio 610, Monday through Friday at 6 a.m. Appreciate everybody who tunes in there, tunes in here. You can catch the radio show, as I mentioned, 6 a.m. Monday to Friday on the Odyssey app, on the radio, 6:10 a.m., YouTube and Twitch as well. You can get this podcast, well, wherever it is you're listening to it now, or watching it on YouTube, as we are doing a mailbag edition of the show today, and just any little leftover nugs from the loss, 34-7 loss to the Vikings over the weekend. Not much to follow up on with the Texans from that game. Horrible game. As best I can tell, the national experts that power rank teams and the odds board and things like that have not bailed on the Texans, and I think that's probably a good thing. My feeling hasn't shifted drastically as far as how I feel about the ceiling for this team. They got a lot of things on the offensive line they've got to correct, like a lot of things they've got to correct. Effort with their most highly paid guys probably being one of them. I don't know if that's the easiest thing to correct or the hardest thing. It's the easiest thing to do is just try harder. It's maybe the hardest thing to do is rewire somebody who's inclined to not give a damn sometimes, or at least not appear to give a damn sometimes about blocking. And yes, I'm talking about Laremy Tunsil, or care about false starts, or care about illegal formations, or care about taking ownership of false starts and illegal formations. Over the last 48 hours, this is probably the most vitriol that I've seen from Texan fans towards a single player, maybe since Brock Osweiler. I'm trying to think. Like, there have not been many Texans players, and the Texans have had more than their fair share of bad players since the Brock Osweiler era. I don't know that they've had any that I can think of that fans want either benched or traded or cut. And by the way, none of those three things are happening. Let me just level with you guys right now. I probably should hold off because I've got at least 2 or 3 Laremy mailbag questions. So whatever I say here may get either sloughed off or repeated during the mailbag. But for anybody asking if they're going to trade cutting him is stupid. Trading him is like just one level above stupid. I'd have to hear what the trade offer is, but the Texans take a massive cap hit if they move on from him in either fashion, trading him or cutting him. He just had a contract extension that kicked in last year. It might have kicked in this year. Either way, the dead cap hit for him is like $50 million to move on either via trade or cutting him. So there's no getting around math. Okay. Like these are the rules. There's no getting around that. So the only interesting conversation in all this is, do you bench Laremy Tunsil? Keep in mind, he was voted as a captain by his teammates. So as we sit here and dog his example that he sets for younger players with his lackadaisical interest in things like, I don't know, run blocking, staying on sides. Keep in mind that his teammates voted him one of the 7 captains for this team. So I acknowledge that. I acknowledge that we are seeing the tip of the iceberg. Unfortunately, the tip in this case is the most important part because it's the actual games on Sundays. We don't see what the work ethic is like behind the scenes. We do see that he doesn't practice during training camp. I would say that would be a check against somebody who's captain material, but what do I know? So the only interesting conversation here about Laremy to me is, do you bench Laremy Tunsil? Do you punish him in some way for such egregious malpractice as a left tackle? And if they wanted to, I'm fine with it. It would be a super interesting story. That's probably half the reason I would like it. I mean, what great content that would be. I just don't think it's happening. I don't think, Laremy Tunsil is still overall a good football player. And you've got to consider, do you send a message to Laremy Tunsil and to the team at the expense of endangering your franchise quarterback? There's no question they get worse at pass blocking if you put Blake Fisher in instead of Laremy Tunsil. They might get better at run blocking only because you can't get much worse than the Texans have looked doing it over the last 2 games. So I take a step back when I talk about benching Laremy Tunsil just to go, okay, are we doing something? If we were to do that, and again, it's not happening. They're not benching Laremy Tunsil. My guess is if we had a chance to do an interview with either Nick Caserio or D'Amico Ryans on our show, and when we would ask about Laremy Tunsil by name, that they would have a lot of good things to say about Laremy and his example he sets and his work ethic behind the scenes. I don't know how honest it would be, but I don't think they would publicly throw him under the bus. So, I don't think they're going to. I mean, I know they're not. They're not going to bench Laremy Tunsil. D'Amico was asked about the offensive line yesterday in his press conference, and he had glowing things to say about an offensive line that cleared the way for 38 yards rushing, and nearly got C.J. Stroud killed a few times. So that, yeah, I understand where everybody's coming from on the Laremy Tunsil stuff. It's infuriating. I think the drafting of Blake Fisher indicates that they know there is a problem with one of, if not both of the tackles. I don't think it's an accident that they drafted Blake Fisher. I don't think they were just crossing off names and they looked up and said, oh, look, Blake Fisher, best available. I never 100% believe that that's the case. Like the whole best available thing, regardless of position. So let me add that little bit in that I'm skeptical that there's such thing as a best player available mentality. But I get it with Laremy Tunsil. I get where everybody's coming from with that. So that's been the big topic. As far as the national impression of the Texans, they're 14-1 to win the Super Bowl now, which puts them about 7th or 8th on the board. That's about where all the big power rankers have them. Seth and I do the power ranking of the power rankings at 9 o'clock on Tuesdays, where we power rank all the different outlets as to how they rank the Texans. It's pretty transparent. The better you rank the Texans, the higher up you are. But we use 5 of them. We use ESPN, SI.com, CBS Sports, NFL.com, and The Athletic. The lowest they were among those 5 outlets was 8th. The highest they were was 5th, which is probably more about where they belong than where they were after the win over the Bears. 19-13 win over the Bears, which means less and less with each passing week of Caleb Williams not really showing he's better than Jaden Daniels. But anywhere from 8th to 5th, the Texans are. Hey, look, this time a year ago, going into week 3, the Texans hadn't won a game yet. They were 0-2. So this is, this is a fast turnaround. That's the part I need to take a step back from. But the problem is some of the things feel so fixable. Like it feels like a lot of their problems are mental or effort related. Like physically, this feels like a really good football team. They got a lot of good players on the team. But maybe a little bit of coaching, maybe a little bit of just the football IQ side is what's dogging them right now. So that's where we are. As far as the podcast goes, subscribe, rate, and review. We're going to get into the mailbag here in just a second, but hit the subscribe button. More and more people subscribing. We appreciate that. If you can share the podcast with people that you know are Texan fans, I really appreciate that too. Seth and I will be out at the pregame show on the big stage out there before the Jacksonville game this weekend. So please come by and say hello, and hope to see a lot of you out there. Jacksonville and Buffalo back to back. The Texans could get a guy fired this weekend. If the Texans do to the Jaguars what the Bills did to the Jaguars, and I don't want to put the Texans on the same level as the Bills, we'll find out about that a week and a half from now, if they can hang on the same field with the Buffalo team that looks unstoppable right now. But I do think it's in the cards that they could beat the Jags by, a couple touchdowns, 2-3 touchdowns. Shad Khan, the owner of the Jags, said this is the best team in the history of Jacksonville, the one they have this year. That's 0-3. So Doug Peterson's got to be on thin ice. After coughing up the division lead last year. They were 8-3, and they finished 9-8. The last time Trevor Lawrence has beaten an NFL team as a starting quarterback was the Houston Texans in Week 12 last year. The one win they got down the stretch wasn't even a Trevor Lawrence start. It was C.J. Beathard. So Trevor Lawrence hasn't won a game since Week 12 of last season against the Texans. Cannot let that happen on Sunday. Cannot. I mean, when you look at what Buffalo is now, this game on Sunday, and I'll repeat this on Thursday or Friday when I do my preview episode, this game takes on major importance because of how on the ropes Jacksonville. You have to win this game. You lose this game, then you're 2-2. Who knows what the other 3 teams in the division are doing, but you've given Jacksonville life if you lose this game. And the Colts look like they figured a few things out at least. And then I don't know if Tennessee can just stop turning the ball over. They might be a better football team. But if you lose this game, you've got Buffalo coming in the following week, who looks unstoppable right now. And then after that Buffalo game, you've got 2 road games. Granted, one of them is the Patriots, but this is a team that lost to Atlanta, Carolina, and the Jets on the road last year. I don't think they've advanced to the point where we would just poo-poo the fact they're playing New England in week 6 on the road. And then they play Green Bay. We'll probably have Jordan Love back at that point on the road. So, I mean, if you lose this Jacksonville game, there is a real possibility. I won't say a real possibility. There's a possibility of 2-5 to start. I would say there's a realistic possibility that you're 3-4 to start the season. And I would say all of a sudden, even being above 500 7 games in is the underdog in that point, because you're not going to be favored against Buffalo the following week at NRG, and you're probably not going to be favored against the Green Bay Packers in Green Bay, especially if Jordan Love is back. So this is a really, really key game for the Texans. This is a win that to me falls. You guys know I like to do buckets, like the bucket of must wins, like teams you should beat, the bucket of coin flips, which is, okay, we split these 50-50. And then the steals, which there's usually 2 or 3 games on the schedule for the Texans, at least, where they're fairly heavy underdogs. And if you can take one of those, then you're feeling pretty good. Like I would say, like the Chiefs in Kansas City would be a steal game later this year, that kind of thing. So this Jacksonville game has turned into in what I call the must-win bucket, which is you must win this because you don't get many of these in the NFL. This is a beaten, downtrodden, divisional opponent who is on the ropes. You got to finish them. You got to finish the Doug Peterson era this weekend. So those are my initial thoughts on the game. A reminder that with the mailbag, HOU mailbag at gmail.com. All right, let's get to it. I know that, there we go, HOU mailbag at gmail.com. I'll keep that on the bottom of the screen for those of you watching on YouTube. So if you think of something you want to send to me, keep in mind, I don't read any of the emails until after the game on Sunday. So I've had a few of you send me emails about what I think of the game coming up. You'll send one to me like after this mailbag about the Jacksonville game on Sunday. I won't see it probably until after the Jacksonville game. So if you want to send an email about just a general topic on the Texans, fire away, go send it. But I don't look at the mailbag until after the game is over on Sunday. So that just so you know that, which basically what I'm saying is once the game is over Sunday, then really fire away. All right, let's get to this. Dario from Monterey. Can I just tell you, I love the fact that all the different places I get emails from for this podcast. Here we go. I'm a firm believer that losing can always happen, but it can never be tolerated. Richard Bach wrote, argue for your limitations, and sure enough, they're yours. The way that we lost was truly irritating. I hope that the ass whooping we received sticks positively with the team and we don't start a losing mentality. No excuses. Man up. Be accountable. Learn and be better for the next one. Now that I vented, and he thanks me for that, and I think thank the audience too, Dario, because they listen to you venting as well. My question is, aside from the penalties, if you could choose one miscue or problem observable from the first 3 weeks of the season to be immediately resolved and stay that way for the remainder of the season, which one would you choose and why? And he lists several of them. To me, and he's got one listed here, he's got one of them, the one I would pick, and it is an easy one for me, the run blocking. They've got to be able to run the football if this is how teams are going to scheme against them offensively. If teams are just going to say, hey, we're not going to let you beat us deep, we're not going to let you get big chunk plays, we're going to keep Diggs and Nico and Tank in front of us, the only way they're going to get anything deep is if they're making otherworldly plays that only 15 people on the planet can make. That's not a recipe for success. That's not sustainable. Nico got 86 yards against the Vikings. Most of them were after the game was decided already, so they were successful against Nico. Most of the stuff Diggs got was a little underneath dink and dunk stuff. And once again, Tank Dell had a game where he was essentially a non-factor. So that'd be the one thing for me. If they can run the football and loosen defenses up and make them respect the box, if you will, then that's going to open things up for the passing game. But thus far, that to me is the most disturbing thing, and the run game is part of it. But the fact that we have yet to get the offense that we were promised in the offseason. I say we were promised. It's not like Bobby Slowick and D'Amico Ryans and Nick Caserio stepped up to a podium and said, here's the offense we promise you, taxpayers. They're not political candidates. Thank God for their sake. But I think I should say the offense we envisioned. How's that? So that would be my thing. I think if they can start to run block and move the football on the ground, man, this offense is going to look a lot like it did for most of the Colts game. Honestly, that's the one game where they put it all together. Dario says, muchas gracias. Keep up the great work. Thank you, Dario. Say hi to everybody in Monterey for me. Sean from Nashville, new emailer to the show, to the podcast, says I'm Sean from Nashville, where I have to see that ugly sight Titan fans call Nissan Stadium for my condo every morning that I wake up and make coffee. Oh, that's horrible. So out your window, you see Nissan Stadium. Oh my God. I think I'd rather live directly across from a hideous exhibitionist than look at Nissan Stadium out my window. That sounds brutal, Sean. I'm really sorry. I feel bad for you. I look out my window here. You guys can see in the background. My place looks off to the north side, so I don't see any real landmarks, but on my balcony here, I can see downtown. And then out the west side of the apartment over here, I see the Galleria, which looks really cool because the big thing I look at is the Post Oak Hotel there, Tillman's place, where he's got the 4 diamonds across the top. I've got good views here, man. Way better than yours, Sean. I'm really sorry to hear that. Your questions, let's get to those. Will Cade Stover continue to see more playing time now that Brevin Jordan is out for the year? Yes. Prepare for that. And I know Cade Stover looked overwhelmed in that Minnesota game. They ain't got nobody else right now. They got Dalton Schultz, who himself is not a great blocker, and they've got Cade Stover. And I don't know. We'll see if maybe Irv Smith Jr. gets called up from the practice squad. He was a really talented guy coming out of Alabama, but more of a pass catcher than a road grader. Fun trivia fact: my brother played with Irv Smith Sr. at Notre Dame, he was a first-round pick of the Saints back in 1994, I think, 93, 94. I can't remember. But yeah. So I've got 6 degrees of separation from Irv Smith Jr. My brother is Kevin Pendergast, who played with Irv Smith Sr., who planted the seed, which gave us Irv Smith Jr. So anyways, I say all that to say, yes, Cade Stover is going to get plenty of playing time, and they're going to let him live or die. They love Cade Stover. He had a rough one against the Vikings, but they love him. And that is a guy that I trust is working on fixing his problems from the Minnesota game. I trust Cade Stover is trying to fix what ailed him. Most of what ailed him was he got one-on-one. He got singled up against Jonathan Grenard, and Grenard proceeded to eat. Sean from Nashville, this is a visual thing, so I can't, but he put a picture of some H-Town Blue coasters that he bought off of Etsy on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being amazing. What do I think of your coasters? I think your coasters are fucking awesome, dude. Anything with the H-Town Blue, I'm down with. D'Amico had that hoodie on yesterday with the H-Town Blue H and with that shade of blue. It's really hard. It's super hard to fuck that up. Like anything with the H. The H has really grown on people. People didn't. I feel like at first people didn't really like it, or they were skeptical about it. I think the H looks awesome. So yeah, dude, those coasters are money. He got them on Etsy. If you're wondering, where can I look at these? Etsy. Appreciate the email, Sean. Don't be a stranger. Sorry about your shitty view out of your condo. Ryan from the Shug. Ryan's back. Sometimes when you hire for a job, you consider the cultural fit. Like Will Anderson Jr. said, Texans ain't for everybody. You might be talented, but you don't fit our culture. To this point, some O-linemen may never be in the Payne and Pendergast circle of swarm. How do I know this? They were never drafted or signed by Caserio. They're not the swarm cultural fit that Caserio or D'Amico would prefer. Do you think Titus and Tunsil are not cultural fits for this team? Do you think it's because they were brought in by B.O.B.? And then says, thanks for all the good coverage. Let's hope we have a good game next week. I've got tickets, hoping to see improvement. We'll stop by the booth and say hi. Awesome, Ryan. Stop by and say hi. Here's my thoughts on what you have to say. To me, the Bill O'Brien, the second that Laremy Tunsil got another contract extension last year and that Titus Howard got his first contract extension, his second contract, his first extension off his rookie deal, they ceased being Bill O'Brien guys. They became Nick Caserio and D'Amico Ryans guys. The second they got those extensions, then it didn't matter that O'Brien brought them in because it's easy enough to let them go, trade them, let them walk in free agency, find another solution, which they may be doing already with Blake Fisher, finding another solution. There's probably some regret with those contracts, at the very least with the Titus contract. And probably Tunsil after last week. I still think Tunsil's a good player. I just think he's I don't know how much he cares. And I'm not saying he doesn't care. I'm saying I don't know how much he cares. There's a lot of other players I can observe on this team, and I go, that guy cares. Like, I'll watch Azeez Al-Shire play. This looks like the most important thing to him, like above his family and everything else, right? That's just one example. Jalen Petrie. This feels like it's really important. I know Jalen misses tackles sometimes, but I don't think it's because he doesn't care about football. He probably cares too much about football, and that's why he misses tackles. Tunsil, I just don't know, man. I watched some of these highlights where blocking in the run game just looks like an inconvenience to him. So I don't think that the Bill O'Brien thing factors in at all anymore, because they were given big money contracts by this regime. And it may very well be that they're not cultural fits for this team. Again, I say that knowing full well we don't know what goes on behind the scenes, but what's going on in front of the scenes right now, it ain't that good. It ain't that good. Ryan, appreciate you. I'll see you on Sunday, hopefully. Chris in the ATL, my man. Chris back in the mailbag. I love that. And he wants to talk about Tunsil. All this talk about who from the Texans can get on him to shape up and cut this penalty shit out. They're dancing around like he's a spoiled princess who they don't want to disappoint or upset. Enough already. J.J. Watt said D'Amico could call him when he needed him. J.J. Watt said, okay, let me back up. J.J. Watt said that D'Amico could call J.J. when D'Amico needed J.J., okay? Well, right now, I think the best person to talk to Tunsil is J.J. Watt to put him in his place. He knows him. He knows his playing style. He's a Texans legend that people respect. J.J. would be my pick to get the message across to Tunsil. Who would be your pick? I don't think J.J. would – first of all, I don't think D'Amico wants to outsource the coaching or the motivation of any player. If he's got to outsource it to somebody, then you don't have the right coach. And I think D'Amico Ryans is 1,000% the right head coach for this football team. So it's an interesting hypothetical. I would say this, if JJ was hanging around practice one day, and from what JJ observed, Tunsil could use a little bit of input from JJ Watt, I wouldn't be averse to JJ saying a thing or two to Laremy Tunsil. Now, who would be my pick? I do want to answer the question, Chris. Who would be my pick to try to get through to Laremy Tunsil? It wouldn't even be a football player. It wouldn't even be a football person. From everything that I've learned, both in doing stories about him for the Houston Press and in talking to people that know him well, the person I would have that I would try to have get through to Laremy Tunsil would be John Lucas. That is who I would have talk to Laremy Tunsil. John Lucas would give him unvarnished, graspy-ass John Lucas voice for enough minutes to make Laremy Tunsil feel really uncomfortable with his shitty effort at run blocking and his complete inattentiveness to illegal formation and false start penalties. John Lucas would be my pick. What do you think of that? I think that's a pretty genius pick, if you want to know the truth. All right, let's keep it moving. We're getting some of the regulars in here, and you know if there's a regular in here, it's got to be France in the North, who's coming to the Buffalo game next week, or in 2 weeks, whatever it is, week and a half. And France feeling himself a little bit because he's right. He asked about the over-under for Tunsil penalties in the game. I think somewhat tongue-in-cheek. I don't want to speak for France. It's crazy to think that you would put the over-under for any NFL player at 2.5 penalties for a game. Sure enough, France did that last week, and I probably sloughed it off like, oh, come on, France, that's pretty funny, but blah, blah, blah. He got 5. So France is saying, dare I say the number for this week is 4.5. That's the scary thing. Now I would take the under just because it's really hard to be that inattentive and shitty to your job 2 weeks in a row. But by all means, so France in the North is saying 4.5 for penalties on Tunsil this week. Who am I to argue? Says, I know there'll be a lot of negative or angry emails. I'll try to keep mine light. Despite the destruction that was Sunday, how did you like the distribution between the wide receivers? It seemed like everyone was getting touches, which is what we hoped for at the start of the season. Sorry, my phone was ringing. I was fine with it. There's nothing from a 34-7 game though that I want to take away from it, especially offensively when they only scored 7 points. And like, aha, that's what we've been looking for. Even though all the guys did get Diggs got 10 catches, Nico got a few downfield hits on plays. Tank got screwed by a penalty from Tunsil on a big chunk play and had a few other plays in the game. So I mean, I hate to dismiss it, but I can't. There's nothing in a 34-7 game offensively where I can say, oh, I really like that. Especially because a lot of the distribution, to use your word, France, came when they're down 21-0. You know what I mean? Like, it's just there's nothing I can pull from that where I go, oh, okay, well that's what it should look like next week. Now next week, which I mean this week, is Jacksonville, which they hopefully have their way. Let me just say this, France. I'm not going to get into your hypothetical offensive line of wrestlers, past or present, in this episode. I may save that. France in the North says if you had to compile an O-line, says someone else asks you wrestling questions. Can't remember who. That's Jason and Leander. He hasn't been in a couple of weeks. So somebody check on Jason. But France says if you had to compile an O-line of any wrestlers, past or present, who would you choose? His line is left to right: Big E, Earthquake, Yokozuna, Rikishi, and Bam Bam Bigelow. I would say you're onto something because these are all big men who can move. It's got to be the version of Yokozuna before he got to 600 pounds. Like the version of Yokozuna when he first got to WWE, where he's probably 380 or 400. That one I would put at center. 600-pound one, you're going to get beat on an inside rush quite a bit. Rikishi and Earthquake, and then Bam Bam Bigelow at right tackle. I might flip and put Bam Bam over at left tackle, put him on the blind side. That dude had good feet, man. That dude had good feet. All right. And then tight end, Roman Reigns. Has to be, right? Mr. Acknowledge Me. Yes. Roman Reigns at tight end. Appreciate that, France in the North. All right. Let's keep it moving. Mailbag. We still got a bunch of these, man. I got to get this going. How far in are we on this thing? Oh, we're at 26 minutes. Okay, I'm good. We're making good time. This is from Glenn Childs. Would it have been a better choice back in 2019 to trade with Washington for Trent Williams, who I feel could have been obtained for much less draft capital instead of Laremy Tunsil? Let me stop right there because Glenn goes on to make his case for why it would have been a better trade. There's no reason to list all. Yes, it would have been better. In retrospect, it would have been 100 times, not 100 times better. It would have been better. The Niners got Trent Williams for a third and a fifth, I want to say. And then eventually they had to pay him. The Niners did, top of line money twice. They had to pay him again this offseason. But he's been worth it. He's been the best left tackle in football. So yeah, they would have been better off. Trent Williams has a house, I believe, here in Missouri City. I mean, he probably would have wanted to come play here. The question becomes, that trade would have been done in the Bill O'Brien, Jack Easterby era. How would Trent Williams have handled being on literally one of the worst teams in football for a 2 or 3 year period, from 2020 to 2022. Tunsil actually remained a good soldier, probably because money is the most important thing, and he was getting paid pretty well to do so. So, yeah, but I think they would have been better off with Trent Williams in retrospect. Charles Honeycutt on the email. Thank you, Glenn, for the email. Charles Honeycutt, should we be concerned about Bobby's handling the offense? Outside of week one, our O-line play hasn't been up to par, and I think that's prevented us from having consistent drives. There's a lot of people out there concerned about Slowick in the offense, and rightfully so. They haven't put together a truly quality running game since he's gotten here. There's nothing that indicates that the running game is getting better, other than they had a good game with Joe Mixon in week one. But to me, the Niners are a great example of that. They haven't had Christian McCaffrey all year long, and I get it, they're 1-2, but they're not 1-2 because they can't run the football. Jordan Mason, I believe, is the name of the young kid they've got running the football. He's got 2 100-yard games and a 77-yard game so far to start the season. So, yeah, Bobby Slowick's stock is probably hold for me right now. If we were doing buy, sell, hold, probably hold. I don't know. They'd be buying stock in Bobby Slowick right now, but I wouldn't be dumping my Bobby Slowick stock. I think he's still a good offensive mind. They got to get through to this offensive line. Their offensive line plays like the dumbest offensive line in the league way, way too often for guys who I don't think are dumb. That's the thing. They play like dumb players. I don't think they are dumb guys. Thank you, Charles, for the question. Dennis is in Budapest. Love global representation. While it was super frustrating to watch, I'd rather have this wake-up call now than next week. I agree with that. Third game in a row full of sloppiness and self-inflicted wounds. I agree with that. That's nothing new. As much as I love D'Amico, this team has been more undisciplined than I'm comfortable with if the goal is a Super Bowl win. How could that be? On the defensive side, I feel it's the nature swarm defense. That I'm okay with. But on the offensive side, after several high-level O-line coaches fizzled out, it might just be the lack of accountability from the leader of the offensive line. I so desperately want Laremy to volunteer to take the podium and the blame and the responsibility for the O-line to fix this. But he might not just be that guy. That's a really interesting thing. That's a really interesting thought. Like, what if Laremy Tunsil went to the podium this week and just like took total accountability, took accountability for the line, but more than anything else, took accountability for his own performance, used the word unacceptable. Is there a way for Laremy Tunsil to get people back on his side if he were to do a podium or an interview this week? You know, he's in the locker room and you got, you know, Aaron Wilson and Brandon Scott and, you know, Sean Bajani and several other people from different stations around town, all the various outlets, Jonathan Alexander and DJ Biename, all those guys are, you know, around his locker. And Laremy just has a 5-minute session there where he's just taking ownership of all this like he should. He's a fucking captain of the team. My God. Would that get people back on his side? I don't know. I am at a stage where I need to see it happen on the field with Laremy. You know, because it could be Laramie's all talk. Laremy thinks everybody's a dog. That's all you need to know about Laremy. Name any player. Dog. All right. Benjamin says this. By the way, thank you, Dennis. Thank you to Budapest. Benjamin says, Sean, love all your content. You and Seth are by far the best show on radio. Totally agree. My question, how is Tunsil considered great when he constantly has the offense in reverse? His penalties are the most reliable aspect of the offense. If he was actually great, this would not be a continuous problem. I appreciate the phone call, Benjamin, especially the first take that you have about me and Seth. Spot on. Here's the thing. I don't know that Tunsil is considered great. You know, I think Tunsil considers Tunsil great. And I think Bill O'Brien considers Tunsil great. I saw an interview with O'Brien before the season started where he called Laremy one of the greatest offensive linemen ever. Big shock that the guy who traded 2 firsts and a second for him thinks that Laremy Tunsil is the greatest thing since sliced bread. I don't think generally around the league people think Laremy is great. I think they think that he's talented. He's very physically impressive. He's a very good and at times great pass blocker. And he's a very average to mediocre run blocker. And so you add all that up, and I think he's good. He's very good at times, but he's not great. And I think the penalties are a big part of that. So I think when you say, how is Tunsil considered great? I think he's considered great by people who have a vested interest in calling Laremy Tunsil great, like Laremy and Bill O'Brien. You know, and maybe D'Amico might call Laremy a great offensive lineman because he's taken up for his guy. But I think D'Amico's not a dummy. He sees all these penalties. It's impossible for you to be considered great when you're committing this many penalties at the crucial times that he commits them. It's just it can't be. All right, let's keep it moving. Matthew Kisecki. This is less of a question about the Texans and more of a question about how you fan at large. I've pretty much evolved into viewing every game in the NFL through the lens of what is best for the Texans. On that end, is that how you view games now? If so, I have a question about what you believe. Okay, well, let me stop there because the if so means that that potentially I view it the same way you do. Matthew, here's how I watch games. I root for the Texans. If it's something that is like immediately impacting them, which every division game does, you know, so I'm always rooting against the Titans or the Colts or the Jaguars, especially now that the Texans are back in the mix to win the division every year. So I always root against the other teams in the division. I would love to get to a day where I'm also watching Chiefs and Bills games and Ravens games, and I'm rooting against them because the Texans are vying for seeding in the AFC. But the fact of the matter is, aside from those nuances to how I root against a lot of the players and coaches I don't like. I root against Deshaun Watson. I root against Sean Payton. I root against Aaron Rodgers every week. Is this a negative way to look at life? Is this a bad way to approach every Sunday? Some of you may think so. Like, Sean, that's got to be a hard way to go through life, just rooting for other people's failure all the time. Generally speaking, I root for the success of most people, except for people I don't like. And then I root for them to fail miserably. Now, all the people I named, if we're just going to use money as the measure for success, are all way more successful than me. They'll all have made more money. However, I think their failures probably bother them tremendously, to where some of them, even like Deshaun, I don't think it bothers him as much as it used to lose. Aaron Rodgers, I think it probably bothers him. Sean Payton, I don't know. These guys are all making so much money. But anyways, I root for, essentially I root against people I don't like. I root for them to have uncomfortable press conferences after games. I just root for that 7 minutes where they've got to answer questions that are completely uncomfortable to them. That's what I root for. Now, Matthew says, I have a question, what you believe is a better outcome for the Texans. Is it better for certain teams to crater or for multiple teams to drop a game? Here's what I mean. Chiefs played the Bengals on Sunday. Chiefs beat the Bengals, and now the Chiefs are 2-0. But Bengals are 0-2. Is that better than the Chiefs and Bengals both being 1-1? Okay, so here's the thing, Matthew. I can't do this in week 2. I'm sorry. I really am. You're an awesome emailer and probably a hell of a guy. I can't get this deep in week 2. This is what I don't do. What's better for the Texans? I root against the division. We know this. Divisional teams lose. That is good because you're trying to win your division. People we hate lose. That's good because it means they're miserable. Deshaun, Aaron Rodgers. I could name Russell Wilson if he ever plays again. I can name several others people I don't like, and I root for them to lose. I can't do the what's better for the Chiefs-Bengals game, one of them being 2-0 and the other 0-2, or both being 1. I can't do it in week 2. It's agitating me to have to think about it. All right, there we go. Sorry, Matthew. I'm not mad at you. It's a good question. I'm going to save your draft question for another time, Matthew, that you sent. Dude, let me just say, if that's how you're approaching the week in week 2, what's better for Chiefs 2-0, Bengals 0-2, or for them to both be 1-1? Bro, that's tedious, man. I would just say, I think you need a few things here, dude. This is me and Matthew. This is an advice session for Matthew Kosecki. All right? You need alcohol so you can just loosen up and watch all the games. I would download the Prize Picks app and play some Prize Picks. That gives you a different kind of rooting, or just get into gambling if you could, assuming you can find a way to do it legally. That's what you need to do. Because that's my other answer to this question is I bet on games. And sometimes I'll bet on games, especially early in the season, that I probably should be rooting against the team because of Texans reasons, but it's an investment opportunity. Who am I, an enterprising young man, to pass up a good investment opportunity? Matthew, that was a really good question. I'm going to say that was a good question. The fact that it got me excited and agitated simultaneously. Good job by you. I'm going to save your other one for another time. A few more here. We've got, 3 more questions, including a Joe Q sighting. Yeah. We'll get to Joe Q last. Anon, been listening to your show in 610 for a long time, around 22 years. Wow. Okay, since the early 2000s. Okay. I've been listening to 610 since 1994. So I'm in my 30th year. In fact, it's almost 30 years to the day. I think September in 1994 is when they flipped to all sports, right around the time I moved here. Anyways, Anon says, my question is, if Bobby Slowick leaves for a head coaching job next year, which I think he will, can we get Gary Kubiak as our OC, assistant head coach? Unless Gary Kubiak has the itch to get back on a sideline or get back up at a booth and call plays, I think it'd be amazing. It would be a coup to get Gary Kubiak as the OC or assistant head coach, whatever title you want to give him, whatever title D'Amico feels is the right title to give him, would be incredible. Of all the outcomes right now, I think Bobby Slowick leaving for a head coach, he's got to get offered a head coaching job before he can leave for one. So he didn't get offered one last year. And 3 games in, I don't know that the performance this year has been, if I'm an owner just keeping track of everybody, the Texans offense has been kind of middling right now based on what the talent level is that they have. And the things that are ailing them are things that roll up to Slowick. I mean, theoretically, everything rolls up to him on the offensive side of the ball. But to me, if I were an owner, I'd be looking at offensive line play, running the football, because throwing the football, like Bobby Slowick, he's got CJ Stroud, okay? And I think a lot of CJ's success you can attribute to Bobby. I think a lot of Bobby's success you can attribute to CJ. This we know. He will not be bringing CJ Stroud with him when he leaves to go take a head coaching job if he were to get offered one. So how that guy coaches up an offensive line, how that guy constructs a run game is a real key thing. And right now he's not doing a great job of that. I don't think Gary Kubiak is going to be back on a sideline. I think Kubiak is having fun at his ranch. He looks very relaxed. He's always there as a resource, I think, for these guys, is my guess. That would be awesome. That'd be a huge story. If Gary Kubiak came back to be the OC for DeMeco Ryans, that would be amazing. It really would. Not going to happen, but it would be amazing. Eric and Austin, thanks for all the quality coverage of our beloved Houston Texans. Any talk of using British Brooks as our back in short yardage situation? Seems like he could be a beast in that role, especially if Mixon misses time. Thanks again. No talk of it, and he only played 3 snaps in this game the previous week. I only the one British Brooks snap that I saw was Cam Akers' long run of the day, 9 yards. Remember it? The 9-yard run by Cam Akers. British Brooks had an awesome block on that play. I think British Brooks needs more playing time, man. I mean, this run game's been garbage for 2 weeks now without Mixon. As far as a short yardage role, sure. Seems to crave contact. He's always moving forward. Why not? All right, last one. Joe Q. Should we be concerned that CJ and DeMeco are now only 5-4 against he sucks guy? It's 5-5 if Bryce Young is now a he sucks guy. Okay, so here's what Joe Q did. Okay, here's what Joe Q did. Joe Q took the opposing quarterbacks that have been beaten, that DeMeco Ryans has faced since taking over as head coach, and put them, I love this, put them into 3 buckets. Really 4 if you include Bryce Young being in his own bucket. Joe Q, that kills me. His buckets are made men in the NFL Mafia. In other words, elite level quarterbacks. Another bucket of just a guy, just a regular, normal, average to maybe below average starter. The other bucket is he sucks. They played a lot of he sucks in DeMeco's 20 games in the NFL. And actually, now that I count this up, 5-4 plus, this email may have come in before the Minnesota game. 1 + 5. Sorry, I'm doing math. 17. No, is Darnold's name on there, Joe Q? I don't know. It's because I copy pasted the table. Okay. Never mind. So he's got a 1-2 record against made men, elite guys, a win over Burrow and 2 losses to Lamar Jackson. He's got a 6-1 record against just a guy. Ryan Tannehill, Baker Mayfield, Derek Carr, a handful of others. The only loss being to Trevor Lawrence in the game that we talked about earlier in the podcast. 6-1. Against he sucks guy, he's 5-4. And he sucks guy includes Zach Wilson, Desmond Ridder, the combination of 2 games into his career, Anthony Richardson and Gardner Minshew. And then he's got Bryce Young in his own bucket, and they're 0-1 against Bryce Young. So the question is, should we be concerned that CJ and DeMeco are now only 5-4 against he sucks guy? I have a hard time getting super concerned about a trend that's 1 year into a rebuilding, into a rebuilding head coach and what was last year a rookie quarterback that's way ahead of schedule. Like, I have a hard time getting worked up considering what the previous 3 years looked like and what a lot of people thought last year would look like. I have a hard time getting worked up that they're only such and such. Now, they've got to eliminate that. If they don't eliminate that, then they're never going to be in a good position to get to a Super Bowl, let alone win one. So am I concerned about it? No, because it was last year, which was way above expectations. Now, they lost to Darnold in week 3. So if they go out and lose to Trevor Lawrence again this week, then yeah, I'm getting concerned all of a sudden, especially you consider they upgraded their talent. So to answer your question, Joe Q, I am not concerned about that. Ask me again after this year, or ask me again if we're, 10 games into this season and they're 4-6. But it's a fair question. So no, I just think it's too early in the Ryans Stroud era to get concerned about some of the losses they had in what was, by everybody's account, an overachievement year in 2023. But the calculus absolutely changes this year, if that's your point. All right. HOUmailbag@gmail.com. That's how you can find me. Subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. That's how you can help me. And give a big round of applause and thanks to Anthony Irwin, our producer. That's how you can help Anthony. He loves when people give him applause. If you missed it, Anthony was on with me for the preview of the Minnesota Vikings. People liked Anthony. I like Anthony. So probably be a solo preview this week for the Jacksonville game. And we'll get back to doing that later this week. So in the meantime, send me your emails. Appreciate you subscribing to the podcast. Appreciate you sharing it with people. If you're coming out to the game on Sunday, please stop by and say hello. I love all of you for listening. Until then, until next time, until later this week, thank you for listening to the Utopia Football Podcast.